"Don't tell the Mercers you're Evan's sister unless somebody asks." That was the first thing my father said after hello. I remember staring at my phone because for a second I honestly thought I had misheard him. I had been awake for almost 20 hours. My boots were still damp. There was dried mud on the cuff of my uniform pants, and a paper cup of coffee from a truck stop outside Fredericksburg had been sitting untouched on my kitchen counter since noon. We had spent the last 4 days coordinating emergency deliveries after a hurricane pushed inland through Virginia. Generator fuel, bottled water, refrigerated medication, replacement communications gear, all the boring things nobody thinks about until they stop arriving. That morning, a county emergency manager had looked me straight in the eye and said, "Major Reed, if you tell me those trucks can make it through, I trust you." By 7 that evening, my own father apparently wasn't sure I could make it through an engagement party without embarrassing the family. "Say that again," I told him. Dad sighed, not an angry sigh. Richard Reed rarely got openly angry when he thought he was being reasonable. That was part of what made arguing with him so exhausting. "Caroline's parents are hosting the reception Saturday at Hawthorne Club," he said. "There will be a lot of people there, donors, attorneys, business people, some political folks. It matters to Evan. I know it matters to Evan. Then help him." I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. How exactly am I hurting him by being his sister? That's not what I said. It was exactly what he had said. But my father had built a 40-year career in construction by knowing how to move a wall 3 inches and insist the floor plan had never changed. Reed Residential had started with my grandfather, framing ranch houses outside Richmond. Dad had turned it into a company that built gated communities with names like Riverstone Preserve and Ashford Landing, places where the mailboxes matched and the homeowners associations sent 12-page notices about the wrong shade of beige. Evan joined the company right out of college. Dad put him in sales, then acquisitions, then started bringing him to golf outings with bankers and developers. I joined the Army. For years, Dad described that decision as if I had taken a temporary detour and simply forgotten to come home. "You could run operations here," he once told me at Thanksgiving. "You always liked organizing things." I had just returned from an overseas assignment. Apparently moving people and equipment across thousands of miles under military deadlines counted as organizing things. Now, 14 years into my career, I was a major working in Army logistics, and my father still introduced my job differently depending on who was listening. Around veterans, I served in the Army. Around his business partners, I worked for the government. Around people he wanted to impress, I became something even foggier. Dad cleared his throat on the phone. "Your mother told Caroline's family you work in federal operations." I actually laughed once. There wasn't anything funny about it. Federal operations. It's accurate. So is truck stuff. You want to use that? Hannah. There it was. The warning tone. I looked across my apartment at the challenge coin sitting beside my keys. One of the county emergency teams had given it to me that afternoon after we finally got a fuel convoy around a washed-out section of highway. On one side was the county seal. On the other, somebody had engraved 3 words. "We keep moving." I ran my thumb across the edge of it. "What are you actually worried about, Dad?" He was quiet long enough for me to know the answer mattered. "The Mercers live differently than we do," he finally said. "Caroline grew up around a certain level of people. Her father manages institutional money. Her mother sits on 2 nonprofit boards. They know senators, judges, people from Georgetown. This weekend is important for your brother, and I don't want anything distracting from that. Anything. Not anyone. Anything." I had spent enough time around men who used careful language to recognize when a noun had been chosen on purpose. "You think a major in the United States Army is going to lower the tone of the room? Don't make it dramatic." That hurt more than I expected. Not because Dad was ashamed of the Army. He stood for the anthem. He donated to the USO every December. He shook veterans' hands at baseball games. He respected service in the abstract. He just seemed uncomfortable when it belonged to his daughter. "I'll come," I said. His relief came so fast I could hear it. "Good. Thank you. But I'm not lying. Nobody asked you to lie. You asked me not to say I'm Evan's sister. I asked you to use judgment." There was another one of his words. Judgment, flexibility, perspective. Dad had a whole vocabulary for asking other people to swallow something he didn't want to taste himself. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a while with the refrigerator humming behind me and rain ticking against the fire escape. I kept thinking about something Sergeant Luis Mendoza had said 3 days earlier while we were rebuilding the convoy schedule at 2 in the morning. He had 3 kids, a bad knee, and exactly 0 patience for self-pity. "Mom," he'd said, "people show you what matters to them when the plan gets ugly." At the time he meant logistics. Now I wasn't so sure. My mother texted 10 minutes later, "Please wear something nice Saturday. Navy would look lovely. Maybe leave the Army talk for another evening. Love you." I read it twice. Then I opened the digital invitation she had forwarded. Embossed crest, cocktail attire, valet entrance, charity presentation benefiting housing programs for military families and veterans. That last part made me sit up. My father wanted me to hide my Army career at a fundraiser partly benefiting military families. I almost called him back. Instead, I kept scrolling. At the bottom of the invitation was one final line, "Special Military Guest of Honor. To be announced." I stared at it for a second, then locked my phone. I figured it was probably some retired officer the Mercers knew through their donor circle. I had no idea that one line was about to turn my father's carefully managed evening inside out. By Saturday afternoon, I had talked myself into believing the worst part was already over. That was naive. I drove up to Hawthorne Club a little after 6, wearing the navy dress my mother had suggested, mostly because I owned it already, and partly because I refused to let her think she had dressed me for inspection. The club sat behind a row of old trees outside Alexandria, the kind of place with brick columns, brass lanterns, and valets who somehow knew which guests expected their keys back without a ticket. Inside, everything smelled faintly like polished wood, expensive perfume, and the kind of money that had been in one family long enough to stop announcing itself. My mother spotted me before I made it 10 feet past the entrance. "Hannah! Good! You're here!" She kissed my cheek, stepped back, and looked me over with the concentration of someone checking a table setting. "You wore your hair down. Apparently I'm full of surprises." She ignored that. Then she handed me my name tag. "Hannah Reed Federal Operations." I stared at it. No rank, no army, nothing that was technically false, which was exactly how my family liked to do things. "You made these?" I asked. "The event coordinator did, using information you gave them." Mom lowered her voice. "Hannah, please, not tonight." I almost laughed. Everybody kept saying that, as if I had shown up carrying a gas can and a box of matches. "Not tonight. Don't make this difficult. Use judgment. Be flexible. There are families where people scream at each other and everybody knows there's a problem. My family was different. We could hurt each other with perfect posture." Evan came over before I could say anything else. He looked good. New suit, nervous smile, the same crooked tie knot he had worn since high school. For 1 second, seeing him cut through all of it, he hugged me tightly. "You came! Of course I came." He pulled back. "You okay?" I looked at the name tag in my hand, then at him. He saw it. His eyes dropped. That told me everything. "You knew?" I asked. "Hannah, you knew." Dad said it would just keep things simple. There it was again. Simple. Interesting how things were always simplest for the person not being erased. Before I could answer, Caroline appeared beside him. She was warm immediately, no performance in it. She took both my hands and said, "I'm so glad you're here. Evan talks about you all the time." I looked at my brother. He suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Does he? Caroline smiled, completely missing the landmine beneath the question. Mostly embarrassing childhood stories. Those are the only ones he remembers. She laughed and pulled me toward the reception room. For the next 20 minutes, I did exactly what my family wanted. I smiled. I made small talk. I met Caroline's mother, Margaret Mercer, who chaired a housing nonprofit, and her father, David, who ran an investment firm in D.C. Neither of them looked remotely horrified by my existence. Then my mother showed me where I was sitting. Not at the family table. At a smaller table near the service corridor with 2 distant business associates, an elderly neighbor of the Mercers, and a man from the catering company's insurance provider. I looked across the room. Evan, Caroline, both sets of parents, and several major guests were seated together near the front. My mother touched my arm. It was the only way the numbers worked. Of course it was. I sat down. That might sound weak, but I need you to understand something. I had spent most of my adult life in systems where every decision had a consequence. You learned very quickly that not every insult deserved an immediate reaction. Sometimes you waited because timing mattered. So I waited. About 40 minutes later, the event coordinator rushed past our table with a radio pressed to her ear. Her face had gone white. I heard 3 words. The veterans' shuttle broke. A group of elderly veterans and military spouses was supposed to arrive for the charity presentation in 15 minutes. Their bus had broken down near the Beltway, and the club's backup vehicle was already in use. The coordinator was panicking quietly, which is how professionals panic. I stood up. How many people? She blinked at me. Excuse me, on the shuttle, 23. How many can walk without assistance? Maybe 15. How many club vans do you have? 2, but one is downtown picking up a donor. Call it back. Use staff SUVs for the ambulatory group. Put anyone with mobility issues in the club van. Split the pickup into 2 locations so nobody has to cross traffic. Send me the driver numbers. She stared at me. I realized I had slipped into command voice. Sorry, I said. I do logistics. That snapped her out of it. Within 8 minutes, we had 4 vehicles moving. By 12, every guest was accounted for. The coordinator exhaled like someone had just removed 50 pounds from her chest. Who are you? Before I could answer, my mother appeared behind me. She does some government coordination. I turned slowly. Mom smiled at the coordinator, that polished social smile, the same one she used when correcting a waiter or ending a conversation she didn't want. Something inside me changed in that moment. Not broke. Changed. Because suddenly I realized this wasn't about one party. It wasn't even about the Mercers. This had been happening for years. Every time they changed major into government work. Every time Dad joked that I moved trucks around. Every time somebody asked what I did and my mother answered before I could. I had spent 14 years becoming someone I was proud of, and somehow inside my own family I was still being translated into something smaller. Across the room, an older man at the head table was watching me. Silver hair, straight-backed posture, no drink in his hand. He wasn't looking at my dress or my name tag. He was looking at me the way senior officers look when they're trying to place a face from years ago. For a second, our eyes met. His expression changed, just slightly, like he had remembered something. I didn't know his name yet, but he knew mine. The older man kept watching me for maybe 3 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until you're the person being watched. Then someone tapped a glass near the front of the room, and the conversation started folding in on themselves. Chairs turned. Phones disappeared into handbags and jacket pockets. Caroline stepped up beside the small podium with her father, smiling in that composed way people do when they've hosted enough formal events to know exactly where to stand and when to move. Before we begin the housing presentation, David Mercer said, "There's someone here tonight who has spent most of his life serving the country and, more recently, helping organizations like ours understand what military families actually need." The older man at the head table stood, and suddenly I knew exactly why his face had been bothering me. General Thomas Barrett, retired 4-star, former commander of U.S. Army Forces Command. 6 years earlier, I had been a captain attached to a joint disaster response task force after a major storm system tore through the Gulf Coast. 1 bridge was gone, 2 fuel points were offline, and somebody at State Emergency Management had changed the medical delivery priorities without updating half the transportation plan. It had been the kind of week where everybody slept in 2-hour pieces and ate crackers over maps. Barrett had visited the operations center once. I barely spoke to him. At least, that's what I remembered. My father leaned toward me. "See?" he whispered. "This is exactly what I meant. Big people tonight. Just let Evan have his moment." I looked at him. He had no idea. "Dad? What?" "Nothing." Caroline finished introducing General Barrett, and the room applauded. He said a few words about veteran housing, about how military families shouldn't have to become experts in bureaucracy just to get basic support, and about how service didn't end when someone took off the uniform. It was a good speech. Short. Specific. No flag-waving nonsense. Then Caroline brought him toward our side of the room. My father straightened his jacket. I actually watched him become a different version of himself in real time. Chin up, smile ready, voice half an octave lower. The Richard Reed who talked to subcontractors disappeared, and the Richard Reed who wanted powerful men to remember him stepped forward. "General Barrett," Dad said, extending his hand. "Richard Reed. Reed Residential. It's an honor." Barrett shook it. Pleasure. Dad introduced my mother, then Evan. My son, the lucky groom-to-be. Evan smiled, but he looked tense. Then Dad gestured toward me, and I swear to you, for half a second, I wondered whether he would finally just say it. This is my daughter. That was all he had to do. Instead, he said, and this is Hannah, family friend. She works in federal operations. Something in me went completely still. Not angry, past angry. There's a point where humiliation stops feeling hot and starts feeling cold. General Barrett looked at my father, then at me, then back at him. Family friend? Dad smiled like nothing was wrong. Yes. Barrett's eyes narrowed slightly. Then he looked directly at me. Hannah Reed? I felt my pulse in my throat. Yes, sir. He took one step closer. Major Reed? The room didn't go silent dramatically. It happened piece by piece. The woman beside Caroline stopped whispering. David Mercer lowered his glass. Evan's face lost whatever color it had left. My mother looked at me with an expression that said, "Please don't." General Barrett stood straighter. Then he held out his hand. Major Hannah Reed, 3rd Sustainment Command Detachment during Hurricane Cormac response. You were at mobile staging. Yes, sir. You rebuilt the fuel and medical distribution plan after the interstate closure. I shook his hand. My team rebuilt it. He gave me a look. Good officers always say that. A couple of people laughed softly. He didn't. The after-action review had your name on it. My father was staring at me now. Not like I was his daughter. Like I had become evidence in a case he hadn't known was being argued. Barrett continued. You redirected guard vehicles through county public works yards when commercial carriers couldn't clear the roads. Yes, sir. And you had oxygen concentrators moved ahead of bottled water because the assisted living facilities were on backup power. I nodded. That was Sergeant Mendoza's recommendation. Barrett actually smiled. Then you listened to the right sergeant. Another sign of competence. There was a pause, and then David Mercer said, Richard, I'm confused. My father's jaw tightened. About what? David looked at me, then at Evan. You said she was a family friend. I didn't answer. I wanted Evan to do it. He had been quiet long enough. Caroline turned toward him. Evan? He looked at me. I held his gaze. For once, I didn't help him. She's my sister, he said. There it was. 4 words. And somehow they landed harder than anything my father had said all week. Caroline stared at him. Your sister? Yes. You told me she worked for the federal government. She does. That's not what I asked. Evan swallowed. No, it isn't. My mother stepped in immediately. Oh, this is just a misunderstanding. General Barrett turned toward her. It wasn't aggressive. That made it worse. What part was misunderstood? Nobody answered. Then his attention moved past me, to the small table near the service corridor, to my half-finished glass of iced tea, to the name card that said Federal Operations. He looked back at me. Are you seated over there? I wanted the floor to open. Not for me. For them. Yes, sir. He turned to one of the event staff. Would you bring Major Reed's chair up here? My father spoke quickly. That really isn't necessary. Barrett looked at him. I wasn't asking you. Nobody moved for a second. Then the event coordinator, the same woman I had helped with the shuttle, stepped forward. I'll do it. She picked up my chair herself. As she carried it toward the head table, she looked at me and gave the smallest nod. Not pity. Respect. That almost got me. Not the general recognizing me. Not my father getting caught. That nod. Because 20 minutes earlier I had helped her solve a problem without asking who mattered, who donated, who had the better seat. And now she was helping me without making a show of it. The chair was placed beside General Barrett. He gestured toward it. Sit, Major. I did. Across the room, Dad was still standing. He looked like someone had pulled the foundation out from underneath a house he had spent years measuring. Then Barrett said something I don't think my father ever forgot. People like Major Reed are the reason large operations keep functioning after everyone else's plan has failed. He looked around the table. Logistics doesn't make glamorous television. It just makes everything else possible. David Mercer nodded. Margaret Mercer looked impressed. Caroline was still staring at Evan. And my father? My father finally sat down. For the first time that night, he had nothing to say. The strange part was I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt sad, because strangers had needed less than 5 minutes to understand something my own family had spent 14 years minimizing. And I was beginning to realize that being recognized wasn't going to be the hardest part of that night. The hardest part was going to be deciding what I would no longer accept, once everyone finally knew the truth. The rest of the reception didn't turn into some dramatic public execution of my father. Honestly, that would have been easier. Nobody yelled at him. Nobody called him a bad parent. Nobody asked him to leave. The Mercers were too polished for that, and General Barrett was too disciplined to waste a room by humiliating someone who had already managed to humiliate himself. Instead, people started talking to me. That was worse for Dad. David Mercer asked how military families actually experienced housing shortages when a service member was transferred on short notice. Margaret wanted to know why some veteran support programs looked generous on paper, but still failed people in practice. A retired Navy captain at the next table pulled his chair closer and started asking about transportation bottlenecks during hurricane season. They weren't being nice to me because Barrett had approved me. They were interested because I knew what I was talking about. That distinction mattered. At one point, Margaret said, "We've been looking for someone with operational experience to review part of our emergency housing plan. Would you mind taking a look sometime?" Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. "Hannah's schedule is pretty unpredictable." I looked at him. "So is a hurricane." David laughed. Dad didn't. "I'd be happy to look," I said. That was the first time all night I answered without checking my family's faces first. It felt strange. Good strange. Like using a muscle you didn't realize had gone stiff. About 20 minutes later, I saw Caroline pull Evan into the hallway near the coat room. I wasn't trying to listen, but the door didn't close all the way. "What exactly did you know?" she asked. Evan said something too quiet for me to hear. Then Caroline said, "No, don't give me the version that makes everybody comfortable. Did you know your father told her to hide who she was?" Silence. That answer was loud enough. Caroline's voice dropped. "If your family can hide the person they should be proudest of because they're worried about appearances, what happens when I'm the inconvenient person?" That one hit Evan hard. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped. He found me later near the terrace. "I screwed up. I kept looking out at the parking lot." "You did. I thought if I stayed out of it, it would blow over. That's what people say when the thing blowing over is happening to somebody else." He winced. "I should have called you. Yes. I should have told Dad no. Yes." He waited, probably hoping I would rescue him from the conversation. I didn't. Finally, he said, "Are you ever going to forgive me?" I turned to him. "That's not the question you should be asking tonight. What is? Whether you understand that being silent was still a choice." He looked down. For once, Evan didn't defend himself. That mattered more than an apology. General Barrett found me a few minutes later with 2 coffees in his hands. He offered me one. Black. I took it. "Thank you, sir." He nodded toward my family. "Been like this long?" I knew exactly what he meant. "Depends what you mean." "You know what I mean." I smiled despite myself. "Yeah, a while." He didn't give me that soft, sad look people sometimes give when they hear something uncomfortable about someone's family. I appreciated that. Instead, he said, "My son spent 10 years thinking I valued the Army more than I valued him." I looked at him. "Did you?" "Sometimes, probably." That surprised me. He took a sip of coffee. "Families are where people excuse behavior they'd never tolerate anywhere else." I let that sit. Then he said, "Don't confuse somebody else's discomfort with a flaw in you." That was it. No speech. No promise to fix anything. Just one sentence. But it stayed with me. Dad approached me near the end of the night. His tie was loose now. His social smile was gone. "Hannah, I waited. I didn't know Barrett knew you. There were probably a dozen things I could have said. That wasn't the point. That was exactly the point. You shouldn't have needed him to." Dad looked at me. Really looked at me. I watched the answer land. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, Richard Reed seemed to understand that the embarrassing part of the evening had never been his daughter's job. It had been his shame. And the strange thing about shame is that once somebody turns the lights on, it gets very hard to pretend you don't see what's in the room. I left before my parents did. No argument. No dramatic goodbye. I handed my valet ticket over, got into my car, and sat behind the wheel for a full minute before starting the engine. My name tag was still pinned to my dress. Hannah Reed. Federal Operations. I took it off. I didn't throw it away. I put it in the cup holder. I wanted to remember exactly how easy it had been for people who loved me to edit 3 words off my life, because I had finally decided they weren't getting the pen back. 3 weeks later, I was standing in a National Guard Readiness Center outside Richmond with a dry erase marker in one hand and a county evacuation map taped to the wall behind me. The room was full of folding tables, bad coffee, extension cords, and people who had shown up on a Saturday morning because hurricane season did not care whether anybody had weekend plans. Margaret Mercer had called me 2 days after the reception. Not General Barrett, not my father. Margaret. She said their housing foundation was partnering with several veteran organizations and county agencies to build a temporary relocation plan for military families during major storms. She wanted someone who understood what happened after the PowerPoint ended and real people started needing real things. I don't need somebody who knows how to make the plan look good, she told me. I need somebody who knows where it breaks. That was probably the best job description anyone had ever given me. So I agreed to help. Not because I needed the Mercer's approval. That part mattered to me. I had spent enough of my life confusing recognition with permission. They weren't giving me permission to matter. They were simply asking me to bring something I already had. By 9 that morning, we had county emergency managers, veteran service officers, 2 Army Reserve representatives, a woman from the Red Cross, 3 nonprofit directors, and 1 retired Marine who had already complained twice about the coffee. General Barrett came in wearing jeans and an old quarter zip. No entourage, no speech. He sat in the second row, opened a notebook, and said, "Don't go easy on us, Major." "I wasn't planning to, sir," he smiled. Then I noticed the name placard in front of me, Majhana Reed, U.S. Army Logistics. I stared at it longer than I should have. Nobody in that room knew why 3 extra words mattered so much. But I did. I still had the old Hawthorne Club tag in my desk drawer at home. Hannah Reed. Federal Operations. I had almost thrown it away twice. I kept it because sometimes you need evidence of the version of yourself you finally stopped accepting. About halfway through the session, the door opened. My father walked in carrying 2 cardboard trays of coffee. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. Dad hated volunteer events unless his company name was printed somewhere. There was no Reed residential banner, no donor plaque, no photographer. Just Richard Reed in khakis, holding 12 coffees and looking mildly uncomfortable. He caught my eye. I didn't wave. He didn't expect me to. Later, during a break, I found him helping stack bottled water beside the registration table. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "Margaret said they needed hands. You hate manual labor. I own a construction company. You supervise manual labor." He almost smiled. "That's fair." We stood there for a second. Things between us had been better since the reception, but not magically better. That's the thing nobody tells you about apologies. One good conversation doesn't erase 20 years of habits. Dad had called me twice. Mom had started asking me what I was working on instead of saying, "Are you still doing all that logistics stuff?" Evan had stopped letting Dad speak for him. Small things, real things, not enough yet, but real. A volunteer walked up beside us, a young college kid wearing a VFW auxiliary shirt. He looked at Dad, then at me. "Sir, are you with Major Reed's team?" Dad glanced at me. I watched the old reflex happen. For half a second, I could almost hear the phrases lining up in his head. Federal work, government operations, something vague, something safe. Then he said, "That's my daughter." He paused. "My daughter, Major Hannah Reed. She runs logistics for the Army." The kid nodded. "Cool," and walked away. That was it. No applause, no dramatic music, no retired general standing up. Just my father saying the truth correctly. I looked at him. He looked embarrassed, not ashamed. Embarrassed that this tiny sentence was apparently such a big deal. "I should have been saying it that way a long time ago," he said. "Yeah, I know. I could have made him suffer a little. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I handed him another case of water. Put those by the east doors." He looked at the box. "Are you giving me orders?" "Yes." He picked it up. "Feels familiar." That made me laugh. Later that afternoon, Evan and Caroline showed up together. They were still getting married, but something between them had changed after Hawthorne. Caroline had made it clear that she wasn't interested in marrying into a family where keeping the peace meant pretending not to see what was wrong. Evan was learning. Slowly. He apologized again, this time without asking whether I forgave him. That was how I knew he finally understood. Before everyone left, General Barrett pulled me aside. "You know what people are going to say about that night?" he asked. "What?" "That I stood up for you." I looked at him. "Didn't you?" He shook his head. No. He glanced toward my father, who was loading folding chairs into the back of a pickup. I recognized you. There was a difference. A big one. I drove home that evening with the windows down and the smell of summer rain coming through the car. For years, I thought the painful part was that my family didn't understand what I had accomplished. That wasn't it. The painful part was how many times I had helped them make me smaller. I laughed off the jokes. I let them simplify my job. I sat where they put me. I told myself it was maturity. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was fear of becoming the difficult daughter. There's a difference between choosing your battles and disappearing to avoid one. I know that now. And if there's anything I would tell someone who has spent years being edited by the people closest to them, it's this. You do not have to become louder than everybody else. You do not have to humiliate the people who underestimated you. You do not even need a general to stand up. But you do have to stop handing other people the pen, because eventually somebody is going to ask who you are, and when they do, your life should not sound like an apology. The deepest lesson in Hannah's story is that our worth does not shrink simply because someone close to us fails to recognize it. Many adults spend years keeping the peace, staying quiet at family gatherings, laughing off dismissive comments, accepting labels that make other people more comfortable, or telling themselves that it's not worth the argument. Sometimes that restraint is wisdom, but sometimes silence slowly becomes permission for others to rewrite who we are. Hannah's real victory was not that a respected general stood up and recognized her service. Her victory came when she finally understood that she no longer needed anyone else's approval to tell the truth about herself. As the old saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. Character, competence, and integrity reveal themselves over time, especially when pressure is applied. At the same time, this story reminds us that people can be wrong without being beyond redemption. Hannah's father caused real pain, but growth began when he stopped defending his intentions and started facing the impact of his choices. That distinction matters in families, marriages, friendships, and workplaces. We cannot always control prejudice, favoritism, or other people's discomfort, but we can decide where our boundaries begin, when silence has gone too far, and whether we will keep handing someone else the pen to define our lives. If this story made you think about a time when you or someone you love were underestimated, dismissed, or asked to become smaller just to keep others comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may help someone else feel less alone. If you enjoyed this story, please give the video a like and subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories about dignity, justice, family, and second chances. Wherever life finds you today, may you have the courage to stand in your truth, the wisdom to choose your battles, and a little more peace after the storm.